Good morning. Our first attendees start to register. Welcome. It's good morning from South Africa. I do realize for others it's good afternoon. Welcome at this webinar. In the meantime, before we wait and we allow attendees to join, use your chat function and just tell us from where you are and who you are. So, hello everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you here. We have Caitlin from Joburg and Rachel from Australia. Rachel, what time is it now in Australia? 3 o'clock. Deborah from Brisbane. Oh, it's 5 o'clock. Thank you. Jonathan from Centurion. What time is it there, Jonathan?
It's also
Daniel. 9 o'clock. Great. Daniel from Western Sydney, 6 p.m. Scott is 1 a.m. in Central Time, USA. Welcome. Christine from Pietermaritzburg, Ilani from Cape Town. So we have representation across the globe. That's very nice. Always happy to hear that. Darwin from Sydney, Gillian from South Africa. Gillian, I'm sure you also have it as 9. Ilani from Cape Town. Welcome, everybody. It's good to have you all here. You will not be disappointed. We're going to share with you great opportunities and also great insight into what these opportunities can bring to you. So we're very happy to have such a participative group. I'm going to allow for another minute or so, just for those who may have connectivity problems. We sometimes really struggle from South Africa with connectivity, but I also see it happens in other countries as well. So morning, another person joined. Just tell us who you are in the chat box and from where you are, please. City from Malaysia. Great to have you online. Linda, morning, Linda. From where are you, Linda? Okay. Linda's from Durban. Welcome, Linda. It's a good morning. Yes. Okay. I think it's 4 minutes past, and I think we can start. I'm first going to, I'm Elmi Castleman. I'm the Regional Director for Southern Africa, and I would like to just tie in what we do today with Golden Key International Honor Society, and where does it fit in terms of the bigger picture. Every decision we take, every benefit we bring, we try to really merge and align it with our mission. So let me remind you of the values of Golden Key. The values of Golden Key is integrity, collaboration, innovation, respect, diversity, excellence, and engagement. And when we go through today's assessments and the results and the insights that one can gain from doing these assessments, you will soon realize how it plays towards the values of Golden Key. For instance, collaboration, innovation, diversity, and excellence and engagement, you will easily notice that it's very much aligned to the insights that you will gain. Then I want to touch on the mission of Golden Key that we all know so well. Our mission is to enable our members to realize their potential through the advancement of academics, leadership, and service. And I want to stand still for a minute on the 3 pillars of our mission. If we want to advance academics, we need to equip our members with the necessary skills to enable them to perform. So, in the first place, to become eligible as a Golden Key member, you have to be identified as a top performer in the top 15% of your faculty and a cutoff point of 65% average. With gaining insight into your own talents and competencies, you can also specifically identify where the areas are that you would like to develop in support of academic performance. The second pillar, leadership, is very important for us as top performers. There's a very close correlation between top performers and leadership positions later in their life. And some of you are already in leadership positions. And that's why it's important for us to equip our members with leadership skills, because we know that's the trajectory of your journey in life and in your career, most likely. And then the third pillar of service. From South Africa, this is very natural for us. We live in a spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are. And it's very easy for us to understand that. And I'm sure it's similar for many other countries. But we also will, with understanding, for instance, your ability to work with different kinds of people, you will also know how you can actually contribute to service delivery. And with that, I want to then go to the Golden Key Academy, which is the latest addition to support the academic performance, leadership skills, and service delivery. The Golden Key Academy is free to all members, and I hope you all are registered as Golden Key Academy members, and my team will put in the chat box the link on how to get to the Golden Key Academy. My advice is that you use your same username and password to register on the Academy. The Academy is the entry point to many other resources. For instance, live webinars presented by global thought leaders and industry experts like our HFM talent partners that we have online today. I'll introduce them just now. Then there are many videos, webinar recordings, articles, and podcasts by Golden Key thought leaders, all in support of these three pillars. The topics support career agility skills, and one of the assessments that will be introduced to you today is around learning agility and agility. And what is important about that is agility is such an important facet in today's changing world. I mean, the world was never static, but we are changing at a speed faster than ever. And it's just very good to have some agility skills, and it will reduce your anxiety. On-demand training, there's more than 50 hours of training on the Academy, certain career sources, and then preferential rates for career assessment tools. It's a bit like Alice in Wonderland. If you want to know which door to open, you need to know where you are. So the assessments give you insight in who you are and what your competencies and specific strengths are. So the Golden Key Academy functions specifically around the 5 thematic areas in support of our 3 pillars. And that is career development, workplace readiness, study skills, personal finance, and leadership. And the assessments will specifically touch on career development, workplace readiness, study skills, and leadership. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our 2 presenters, Janthren and Caitlin from HFM Talent Index. Thank you very much, Janthren and Caitlin, for joining us again today for this webinar. So this webinar is an introduction to the assessment products that's available, and you will know at the end of the session where to access it. Gillian or one of my team members will put it in the chat box. So Janthren Naidu is the country manager of HFM Talent Index South Africa. He's a registered industrial and organizational psychologist with 20 years of experience within this space. He has experience in various areas, including both private and public sectors. His areas of passion lie in management and leadership development, workshop facilitation, and talent management strategy. And as you can see, it ties in very nicely with our mission. His work has taken him around the world, and he facilitated human resource interventions in countries such as Australia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Mauritius. Thank you, Jonathan. It's always a pleasure to have you online. I always feel safe having you online because I know you can answer all the technical questions. Same with Caitlin. Caitlin, welcome online. Caitlin is a registered research psychologist. She has an interest in technology and data analytics as applied to the field of human resource and work in general. Her experience lies in the creation and validation of psychometric assessments, surveys, benchmarks, and training material, as well as the facilitation of talent management initiatives with both the public and private sector. And I want to again say thank you very much. These are highly paid people that do this for us voluntary and in support of the Golden Key mission. And I really appreciate that. It's always nice to welcome you on our webinars. I also want to say that please note that all the assessments are registered with the Health Professions Council of South Africa, meaning it's valid and it's real. What you see is really what you are in terms of various talents and competencies. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan. He will start and he and Caitlin will co-present. Thank you very much. And I'm going to take my face off the screen and mute myself for a minute. And during the presentation, you can use the Q&A function to post your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Elmi.
Thank you very much, Elmi. Always lovely being part of a Golden Key event. And thank you for having us once again. So I'm going to kick off the presentation and I'm going to share my screen and you can help me out, but please letting me know when you can actually see my screen.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so this morning we're going to share with you information about the assessments and the report that Golden Key has very kindly made available to all of its members worldwide. Okay. And in terms of taking measurements of an individual, we can actually consider an individual from various perspectives and different angles. And for our purposes, we're going to consider 4 different types of measurements that we can actually take for an individual. And those 4 are measuring one's potential, measuring one's motivations, one's agility, and one's interests. Now, these translate to different reports. Sometimes there's a single measure in a single report, and sometimes more than one assessment contributes to a different report. We will take you through these different assessments very briefly, spend a little bit more time talking about the actual outcome, the actual report that is available to you. I'm not necessarily going to go through any sample reports, but if you did want to look at a sample report, then you are very welcome to download that, and we will share with you the URL and the ebook where you can actually access those sample reports. But before we actually go into the actual assessments and reports, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the organization that has designed these assessments and reports, and also explain how we actually fit into the relationship with Golden Key. So HFM Talent Index is actually Dutch in origin. So we were founded by a group of organizational psychologists about 23 years ago, highly experienced even at that time. And they were doing lots of work in the field of selection and development and so on for a number of large clients. And through that work, they started building their own assessments and their own methodologies. Okay. The very first assessment or report that they developed was a means to actually predict somebody's competency potential by looking at their personality report. And from that point onwards, various other assessments were developed and added to the suite of assessments that are available. About 15 years ago, sorry, a bit longer than that, I think about 20 years ago, the transition to online assessments was made. And since that first iteration, we are seeing different iterations of the online system. And we are currently on the second version of the online system, with the third version being finalized as we speak. HFM Talent Index at the moment is part of a larger global group called the Assessio Group. So both HFM Talent Index and Assessio have very, very strong foundations in psychological beginnings. And we now currently have a presence across Europe, America, Asia, and South Africa. And from the South Africa office, we also service the rest of Africa, Australia, Mauritius, Madagascar, and so on. Okay. Our clients are very varied. We have clients across different sectors and different industries. So here on this brief list that you see, you're going to see some clients that are in the retail space, some that are in the finance space. There's one or two NGOs, NPOs, an engineering company, logistics company, and then also very importantly, what I wanted to point out to you that we do have clients in the academic context as well. So even though our typical client is commercial in nature, so it's large commercial organizations, we do also have clients from the academic environment as well. You see one of them listed here, the Gordon Institute of Business Science. And just this morning, I actually heard that another one of our academic clients, that's the Graduate School of Business, was recently voted as the top business school in Africa and one of the top business schools in the world. And actually their MBA program actually received very high accolades. And this School of Business actually utilizes one of the assessments and the reports that we're going to share with you today. Now, I mentioned that our typical client does come from the commercial space. And in the commercial environment, this is typically how talent management is viewed. Now, this is what we might call a typical talent loop. And those of you that are studying human resources and maybe even organizational industrial psychology, this could look quite familiar to you. It basically describes the journey of the individual through the organization in terms of talent management. And if we start at the top left-hand side, you'll see that little segment is labeled assessment and measuring. So when we consider when an individual wants to actually become part of an organization, how does an organization make a decision about whether that person is suitable or not? So they employ a wide variety of techniques. So obviously they're going to look at your CV, they're going to do interviews, background checks, and so on. But a very important part of that selection process is also determining whether the person is a correct fit for both the role and the organization. And this is typically done by trying to attain some sort of scientific measurement of the person's levels of potential and levels of achievement as well. So in other words, I'm talking about the actual assessments that can be conducted that are designed to answer questions about role suitability. Once the individual is in the organization, then the focus of the organization changes to actually developing that individual within the position. So making sure that the person is actually performing optimally within the role that they were allocated. So that's the development and growth phase. And this is typically where the line manager becomes quite involved, because obviously the line manager, being accountable for KPIs and so on, has a interest in the individual's performance and development. Then we can talk about actually directing an individual's performance. So how do we actually give feedback to the individual? How do we make sure that they're actually performing in the way that we want to? This is also something where assessments can add value and give insight for both the manager and the individual. And from an organization-wide perspective, we need to understand what sort of talent do we have in the organization? Are we actually equipped to achieve our vision and our mission? Are we actually living up to the values of the organization? So that's when the organization becomes interested in the analytics of all of the assessment data that we might have collected. So while all of this is from an organizational perspective, I think this can also be very interesting for you as an individual. And we can also think about this from an individual perspective. So how do you actually manage your talent as you progress through your career? Okay. And once again, we can start off at the assessment measuring phase. Key to actually developing and harnessing your talent is first to understand your talent. So this is where assessments plays a key role. And we're probably not going to tell you anything that's completely new, but we are bringing it to a different level of consciousness where you can actually start acting on your key talents and maybe even also acting on some of your development areas and your possible areas of limitation. For some of us that might not be that self-aware, maybe we also do require a little bit of assistance in making those decisions about which career path to follow, which modules or courses to sign up for at university and so on. So once again, assessments plays a key role there. Once you have decided on the direction that you're taking, how do you ensure that you actually are growing and making full use of the potential that you have? Once again, the assessments can point to different areas that you can develop. It can also give an indication of your potential to develop in specific areas and also give you specific tips on how to develop in those different areas. Okay. Directing here, it was specifically from an organizational perspective, but once an individual has insight into their talents and how they are performing, they can actually direct their own performance and become master of their own performance. From an analytics point of view, we can think about this from an individual perspective. There will come a time when you might need to take a step back and reflect on your career, reflect on your choices, reflect on the path still ahead and where you want to go in future. And once again, the assessments can help you with that sort of reflection. So what we are basically saying is that by making use of assessments, this is going to give you insight into your own strengths and development areas. In other words, building your self-awareness, okay, which is key for development. And then it's also going to contribute towards your continuing professional development. So not just development into your career, but once you are established in your career, to continue that sort of development. Okay. Career guidance. So for some of us, we might be unsure in what direction we actually want to go. And as I said, we might be unsure what sort of courses we want to sign up for. So there are specific reports that are designed to help you with that sort of decision making. And the career guidance reports can also be extremely valuable when you're making a decision about what sort of role to accept and what sort of organization to actually apply to, because it gives you detailed information about your motivations, your interests, and your potential, and so on, which we will share with you later on. Okay. Just to give an idea about how some of our academic clients utilize the reports. For example, in the MBA programs, they do assessments right at the beginning of the program when they're still onboarding into the program. And they utilize this information to identify the areas of strength and the development areas. They take these development areas into their coaching sessions. They also utilize the information to understand how to group themselves in terms of their syndicates, how to work well in teams, and how to work well in terms of projects. Now, to understand how all of this fits together, we utilize what we call the potential to performance model. And this model we utilize quite extensively, not just in terms of coaching, but also in terms of placement decisions for organizations, in terms of individual development, when we are giving that sort of feedback to an individual, and also when we are giving feedback to teams and to the organization at large as well. So basically what this model says is that very often in the workplace, we are very focused on how the person is performing. So what sort of skills, behavior, knowledge, and experience is the person actually demonstrating? Now, when you apply for a job, the key focus once again is going to be on, can you actually perform in the KPI areas that we have identified for this role? Okay. What we sometimes forget to acknowledge is that this performance doesn't come from nowhere. Yes, it does depend on your training and your studies and so on, but there is the foundation of your potential. We can only demonstrate performance if we have potential in that particular area. Okay, and just to give you a silly little example, you can't expect me to suddenly become a world-class rugby player or world-class soccer player because I just don't have the potential in that area. Okay. Here, obviously, we're talking about a different type of potential. And when we identify potential, it's from the psychological type of potential that you have. So we can actually identify and measure two broad sources of potential, namely personality and cognitive ability. So I suspect that cognitive ability is something that you're a lot more familiar with. IQ tests, aptitude tests, and so on are very, very common all around the world, and we are very familiar with these things. And we also intuitively understand that somebody needs a sufficient level of mental horsepower in order to be able to perform a particular job. Okay. Now, the fact that you are already at a tertiary level of education and that you are Golden Key members, I think this just bears testimony to the fact that the cognitive ability is in place. So we're not going to focus on cognitive ability. Okay. However, having said that, if any one of you feels the need to take one of our cognitive ability assessments, you are very welcome to do that, and we can easily set that up for you. What we will focus on is your personality and what sort of potential can we identify from your personality. Now, this is a less well-known concept, okay? And sometimes people might struggle to understand, but how do you talk about my potential by looking at my personality? This will become clearer when we actually look at the assessment. But for now, basically what it means is we're asking the question, do you have the right sort of qualities for a particular job? So for example, if you applied for a sales type of position, then we know that you probably need to be persuasive, assertive, quite perseverant. So those are all personal characteristics or qualities that are based in your personality. So that is how we can comment on your potential by examining your personality. So we're all born with some sort of potential, and that potential develops into the performance that we are seeing. And the extent to which the potential is actually realized depends on a number of factors. I'm sure you would have come across the nature versus nurture debate. So what are you actually seeing? How much of it is based on nature? How much of it is based on nurture? So potential would be the nature aspect. And the nurture aspect is impacted on by various other elements. And we identify those as the internal catalysts and the external. Easier to understand. It's about the environment that you find yourself in. Is the environment actually fostering the right sort of development and encouraging the demonstration of the right types of skills? When you enter the workplace, that environment is going to be things like the organizational culture. It's going to be things like your manager's style of actually developing his subordinates. It's going to be things like the formal processes that are in place in that organization. For now, in an academic environment, your context might be things like what resources do you have available? For example, the Golden Key Academy. For example, any mentors or coaches that are available in your academic space. Then if we look at the other side, there's also the internal catalysts that we need to consider. The internal catalysts are those that are within you. So what actually drives you? What do you get enjoyment from and therefore will actually pursue? So we're talking about your motivations, your preferred roles, and your interests. Okay. More recently, it was also acknowledged that there's some other quality about individuals that impacts on their performance and enhances their potential. And this was identified as learning agility, or we can think of it just as agility. Okay, so agility is a function of both your potential and your motivations. And Caitlin will tell us a little bit more about this later on. So as I said, our focus is going to be on all of the personality-based type of potential that you as an individual have. And we're not going to be focusing on the cognitive aspects. So if we think about personality, it's a lot like looking at an iceberg. So you will know that when you see an iceberg, the tip that you see is only a very small part of that iceberg. And the bulk of the iceberg actually lies below the waterline. So if we liken this to personality, the tip of the iceberg is the behavior. That's what you can actually observe and actually see. But there's a lot going on beneath the waterline that is impacting on behavior. So all of the non-observable personality traits and characteristics, such as attitudes, interests, motivations, so even your cognitive ability is going to impact on it. Other things that we're not necessarily going to talk about now are things like values and emotional intelligence. All of those things impact on the behavior that we're ultimately going to see. Yes, we can observe behavior, but what about all of the other aspects? So this is where scientific measurement comes into play. And we can actually give you a view of what lies below that waterline. So we make use of objective data, and we make use of very well-established scientific models. So we're not just thumb sucking. So we're able to describe your personality by making use of a very well-established and validated scientific model. However, even though the measurement and assessment is so rigorous and scientific, the report that we share with you is not a scientific report. The report is very specifically designed for you as an individual to pick up, read, understand, and be able to implement. So they're very user-friendly reports. In the commercial context, the reports are also designed for line managers and HR managers. And of course, HR and line do use our reports to determine things like role fit, development areas, and so on. Okay, Caitlin, I'm assuming that you will jump in with any questions that anybody has.
Sure, I will do so. And just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, please feel free to share it. And we will either get to it in the middle or after. Okay, great.
Okay, so for a little while you sounded like you were bringing the waterline, Caitlin, but now it sounds fine.
Okay.
So I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just shout if my connection breaks again. And if you can go on to the next slide for me, I'd like to start just briefly talking about personality in a little bit more detail, right? And what we mean by measuring potential. So the way that we define personality is it's a unique, stable construct. And it basically is your natural traits and characteristics, who you are as a person. And we call it stable because typically we see in the research that who you are becomes quite fixed once you reach adulthood or young adulthood. And it doesn't really change throughout your life. You know, major events may have a small impact, but who you are is who you are. And your personality is a good, stable prediction of how you are likely to behave currently and in the future. And we talk to the Big Five model in the way that we measure personality. That is one of the world's most popular, most well-established models. A lot of you may have heard of it before or come across it, either formally or informally. It's one of those models that have sort of come part of the normal lexicon, things like whether you're more introverted or extroverted, for example. That's one of the factors in the Big Five model. And the questionnaire that we use to assess potential is the 192 items. There's no time limit. But it typically takes between 15 minutes to 30 minutes to complete. So that's more of the operational side if you were to participate in this assessment. But let's look at what you get out of the assessment and how this personality measure may differ from something you've maybe come across online. There's obviously a lot of resources available, free questionnaires that you can take, things like that. But I do want to highlight this personality assessment, and indeed all of the assessments we're going to speak about today, they differ from those online, freebie resources, both in terms of the quality of the information as well as the quantity of the information that you receive. So, obviously I've mentioned the fact that all of the tools are based on very well-validated models, and Jainthran spoke about it in depth earlier as well. And to that end, each item in the questionnaire really does need to be valid and reliable and proven to give accurate information. So when you get the report at the end of the day, you really can rely on those insights as an accurate representation of who you are and of your potential, and a lot of detailed information as well. Quite a lot of depth is provided to you and a lot of resources that you can gain from that. So back to personality and what we call competency potential. Let's unpack that a little bit. So competencies, a lot of you may have also heard of that. We refer to competencies as clusters of behaviors, things like persuasiveness as an example of a competency. And competencies are behaviors that are essential for success, depending on which industry you're in, or if you're studying at varsity, or if you are looking to start a career. Different competencies may be required at different times. And when we measure competency potential, what we are saying is, based on your personality, who you are as a person, what is your potential for a particular competency? In other words, what is your likely behavior? And understanding that about yourself really can give you insight into what am I naturally good at? What may come sort of moderately well to me as much as most other people, and what areas may I struggle in that I can consciously start to consider and perhaps develop if it's required for my current environment or where I want to go in the future. So looking at the next slide, when we talk about competencies, we assess a library of about 44 different competencies. And these competencies, this is an example on your screen, are arranged in different categories in the way that we define them. Operational being task-based, interpersonal being people-based, personal being, quite innate to the person themselves, and conceptual being more strategic types of competencies. And we also can look at them in terms of complexity, which speaks to, how complicated or how complex the behaviors are that are associated with each competency. Thanks, Jantran. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. So obviously, when organizations use these assessments, they are very interested in the competencies because they would identify what are the competencies necessary for a particular role, and they would generate a report that tells them about your potential for each of those competencies. So you might not be as interested in competencies, but you might want to know where your strengths and possible development areas lie. Once you've done the personality assessment, there are 4 different types of reports that you could access to give you this type of insight. The first report that I'm going to talk about is called the Talent Scan report. So the Talent Scan report focuses on 8 broad workplace skill areas. Instead of specific competencies, it talks about generic workplace skill areas. And you can see some examples there on the right-hand side: cooperation, building client relations, situational awareness, and advisory skills. Okay, so these were selected because they are quite broad and they are applicable in a different range of contexts. And they can also be very relevant in your academic context as well. So some of the other skills that will be mentioned in the talent scan are things like project working, problem solving. Sorry, I can't remember the other 8 right now, but there are different skills that are still relevant in an academic environment. So they're going to help point out to you where your possible limitations might lie and the things that you possibly might struggle with and therefore might need to focus on a little bit more. Each of those 8 talents or skills, I beg your pardon, each of those 8 skills are comprised of different specific talents that we identified from your personality. And you can see in the talent scan report, what it does is it tells you which are the top 2 talents for you for that particular skill. So in our example here, you can see in terms of cooperation, this person is probably going to excel as a contributor and in terms of being cooperative. The report then goes on to give you more detailed information about how to actually utilize your areas of talent and skill, things to watch out for. So the flip side of being very high in a particular talent, and also how you can actually develop other areas that you might not be as high on. Okay, so that's quite a comprehensive report. The second type of report is called the Talent Go report. The Talent Go report is a lot more brief than the Talent Scan report. And instead of focusing on workplace skill areas, it rather focuses on the specific talents. So it's focusing on the middle column from this slide. Okay? And it tells you what your top 5 talents are. And obviously these talents are not context specific. So they are applicable to a wide range of contexts. But it identifies those things that you will likely excel at and they come very naturally to you. In addition to identifying and describing your top talents, it also gives you information about how you can actually demonstrate and implement these talents. And furthermore, it gives you some useful guidelines about how to prepare for maybe an interview. So for example, what sorts of questions you might be asked, and this is going to help you prepare to actually answer in a constructive manner. Okay, so both of those are based on purely on the personality. Okay, then the third and fourth types of reports that are being made available to you are a little bit more business focused. So those of you that are already thinking about what your career might look like, these might be more interesting for you. They are called the Management and Sales Potential Index, respectively, based entirely on the personality, and it looks at a number of different elements in your personality report. So remember, we measure 5 factors and 29 specific scales in the personality. And through research, we know which one of those scales is going to contribute towards management potential. And we can then give you an overall score that indicates your likelihood of success in a management type of position. It's given to you on a 9-point scale, where 1, 2, or 3 would mean that management positions don't come that naturally to you, and you would have to put in a lot of effort to be successful or to feel like you're successful in a management type of position. 4, 5, or 6 is the so-called average range. It means that yes, you can likely perform in those management areas with a little bit of effort, like most of us. And on the high side, we consider anything from 6 upwards to be a high score. So 6, 7, 8, 9. That would mean that management types of tasks and responsibilities come quite easily to you, and you can very easily develop skill in those areas. Okay. So through experience with clients using this report, I know that to get a high score on the Management Potential Index is not very common. So when we do see high scores, we know that this person is going to be real high potential in management and leadership type positions. So I would highly recommend this for individuals thinking about something like an MBA, where you're definitely going to be in a driving type of position. This is going to give an indication of whether you actually have the innate potential for that type of role in an organization. Okay. The report is going to give you an idea of both your success and risk factors. And it's also going to give you some specific information in 6 specific competency areas. And those 6 areas were selected through research because they were found to be most relevant across different industries and the sectors. So you're going to be able to see what is your potential for each of those 6 areas, and also a description of your potential in each of those 6 areas. And that description is not a generic description. It is based on your specific personality results. In addition to that, you will also have an indication of what is your preferred management style. So different contexts calls for different management styles. And this is going to help you to decide whether you are thinking about the right direction. Okay. The 3 management styles are directing, coaching, and entrepreneurial. So for example, if you were managing a team of professionals and young professionals, then maybe a coaching style is important. If you're managing a sales team, maybe a directing style is important. Built on a very similar principle to that is the Sales Potential Index, also built through research and utilizing a number of different personality scales. We can give you an idea of what is your potential for success in a sales type of position. Now, this is not necessarily a typical direct selling type of role, but any role that requires some sort of sales ability. So even if you think about entrepreneurship, if you think about being a leader in business, some sort of sales potential is required. So once again, a very powerful indicator on that 9-point scale. And it's a little bit different from the MPI in that it's a little bit more developmentally focused. Okay. And it's going to give you some direction about how to harness your talents in different sales areas, and also things to watch out for in areas that you could develop in terms of sales. It's a little bit broader than the MPI because it gives you your potential on 11 top sales competencies that research has shown to be relevant across different contexts and industries. Okay, so I think those 2 are quite valuable if you are fairly sure which direction you want to go, and you just want to make sure that you have the right potential for that type of direction. So that's the first type of measurement that we can take, the personality measurement, and we've shared with you the 4 reports that are available for you. The second type of measurement that we can take is around motivators. And this basically answers the question, what do you want from the work environment? But I'm going to hand over to Caitlin to tell you a little bit more about this.
Sure, thank you. I also just wanted to mention, so as we go through these concepts and as we go through the reports, I recognize that it's a lot of information, but there is the assessment flipbook available, and that basically goes into a lot of detail per report. You can look at sample reports. You can really get a good understanding of what type of insight you would get out. So I would recommend, if after this you would like some more information, to definitely look at that flipbook and delve further into those areas that interest you. All right, so let's talk about motivations. And for me, this is a very, sorry, I see Mareka also just put the link in the chat for anyone who's interested. Okay, so let's talk about motivations. For me, this is a very valuable area to measure. And basically, when we spoke about personality, we were really looking at what can you do? You know, what is your likely behavior? When we look at motivations, we look at what you want to do. What drives you as an individual? Where do you want to naturally put more energy? And understanding that about yourself is a very good tool to understanding your current career or your future career and what direction you really want to move in so that you get the most out of it for yourself, and also the organization gets the most out of it because you are in a role that suits you in terms of what motivates you. So when we measure motivations, our model that we use is called Quinn's Competing Values Framework. And we look at 20 different individual motivators in our assessment. The assessment is 120 items, not timed. And when we actually plot those 20 motivators, some of them relate more to control, which is, you know, really desiring an environment that is quite structured and ordered and stable. Some of the motivators relate to performance, which is, you know, really motivators around goals, driving for results, seeing outcomes come to fruition. Flexibility, that's another area that we measure where the motivators really speak to independence, things like entrepreneurial spirit. And then people, those are your softer, you know, desiring to help others, build relationships, those types of areas. So those are the four sort of themes that we measure in terms of the underlying motivators. And in terms of Quinn's theory, what we find is that, you know, these areas sometimes compete with one another. So for example, if you're highly motivated by a flexible environment, you're not necessarily going to be high on the control side, because you are more motivated by change, for example, than by structure and stability. So you can really start to see what your profile looks like and which areas for you are on the higher side or maybe on the lower side. Thanks. I don't know if you want to pick it up from here, Jainthran.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. So Caitlin mentioned the 20 specific motivators that we measure. Here on this slide, you see an indication of those 20 motivators in the 4 different categories. And you'll notice that in this example, this individual has some high scores, meaning that those are areas that they're really energized by, and some low scores, meaning that they don't really enjoy or they don't feel energized by those areas. Okay, so once we measure those 20 specific motivators, we can then comment on what is your likely role preference in a team. Okay, so for example, if you are completely performance focused, and if you are driven by status, vitality, success, and responsibility, then it is very likely that your preferred role in the team is that of booster, the person that actually strives for achievement of goals and wants to see things actually being done. Okay, so we identify 8 different team role preferences. Each of those team role preferences is underpinned by between 4 and 6 specific motivators. Some of them are a blend of more than one category, so blend of 2 categories. So for example, the entrepreneur is a blend of both the performance type of motivators as well as the flexibility motivators. This is very important for the hiring manager, because they want to make sure that the person actually wants to do the type of work that they want to hire them for. So they hire you because you can do the job, but you're going to stay because you want to do the job. So that is why assessing motivations becomes really important. I feel that this can also add value for you in your academic context. It's because very often you are going to be working in syndicates and teams. So this is going to give you an idea of what your preferred role is. So what type of responsibilities to accept in a team assignment, for example, and how to actually put together an effective team. So to make sure that all of the roles are actually being represented in your specific team or syndicate. Now, this type of information you will receive in a report called the Career Drives Report, and it is going to describe the model to you, and then it is going to tell you what your top 2 role preferences are. Okay, and once it's identified your top 2 role preferences, it gives you some detail in the, for example, as illustrated on the right-hand side here. So this person, for example, has a preference for the achiever role, and the report will give the person some idea of what is their preferred behavioral style, what's going to cause them stress, how do they cope, and what's their likely behavior in a team context. Okay, so this is also quite nice for you to be able to understand each other because it gives information in a very non-threatening way that I think you'll be very comfortable sharing with other individuals. Okay, so that's the report that's based entirely on the motivations assessment. We're going to now move on to reports that are based on more than one assessment. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is agility. Okay, and learning agility specifically is defined as the ability to quickly develop new effective behavior based on new experiences. So it's important to note that learning agility, even though the title might be a little bit misleading, is not about anything cognitive. So you're not looking at your learning potential or your cognitive ability, anything like that, but rather how open are you to new experiences and how quickly do you become effective in a new situation. What we do know about people with higher learning agility is that they don't just tolerate change, they actually support change, and on the very high end of the scale might even drive change. Actually, I'm not going to talk about the other notable findings. I'm actually going to hand over to Caitlin in a little while to talk about the research that we have done in terms of learning agility. But let me very quickly give you a little bit more detail about how we measure learning agility. Learning agility is comprised of 5 different dimensions, namely change agility, mental agility, people agility, results agility, and self-awareness. I'll very quickly describe these different agilities. Change agility is the extent to which you want to try new things and want to experiment. In the learning context, if you're high on change agility, it means that you will learn best when you are given the chance to just do things by yourself and experiment by yourself. Mental agility is all about being open to new ideas, being comfortable, being creative, dealing with vagueness and complexity, and being creative. So in a learning context, it means that you probably get most benefit from the opportunity to engage with the material, analyze the material, and understand the material. Okay. People agility is about being constructive in your interaction with other people, being open to different backgrounds, and wanting to learn from other individuals. So from a learning perspective, it means if you're high in learning agility, you're probably going to benefit most from coaching, mentoring, and learning from other individuals in other ways. Results agility is about looking ambitious, driven, focused, and achieving goals, even if things change or even if the goal is not that clearly defined. In a learning context, if you're high on results agility, it means you're probably going to benefit most when you feel challenged, maybe by tough assignments, by challenging deadlines, and so on. Self-awareness we've placed at the center because it does play a central role. It's the extent to which you understand your strengths and your limitations and how driven you are to actually develop. When somebody is high on self-awareness, they will be able to identify when they have a limitation in one of the other 4 areas, and they will be driven to actually try and overcome that limitation and therefore be able to perform in that area when the need arises. Okay, so your overall learning agility is made up of those 5 specific agilities, but you also get insight into your 5 different agilities. Okay, so why should we even consider learning agility? I'm going to hand over to Caitlin to tell you about the research that was done.
Thanks, Jantran. Yes, so learning agility is quite a recent construct. The term came about in the year 2000, but it was brought about by quite a lot of research that was done, partially by the Center for Creative Leadership in the US. And basically what they were looking for is what are the factors that make some leaders successful and really able to keep up while other people may struggle or fall behind. They may get promoted into a leadership role, but then they just can't quite keep up with their peers. And excuse me, besides personality and cognitive ability and all of these other areas that are, very well established, learning agility has added a lot of value in understanding, for instance, in your employees, how they really adapt and respond to change. And, in a way, their stretchability in times of change. And for you as an individual, that same, type of information can be extremely valuable in understanding your learning styles in response to new situations, how best and how proactively to learn to make the most of new situations, and then also which areas you may want to develop to keep yourself, up to date and, like I said, maintain that agility. What we see in the research, and there's been quite a lot of research that's been done on learning agility since it came about, because it is such a hugely popular concept that has gained a lot of traction in the modern world. And what we see if we look at benchmarks, and these are benchmarks from our global study that we have done, where we have about, a data set of about 22, 25,000 participants, is that most people are average on learning agility, which means that the average population, the average person, they deal with change and new situations as effectively as most others, which makes sense. When we looked at senior managers, we find that senior managers are typically higher on learning agility. And this makes a lot of sense if you consider, there's a lot more demands placed on senior managers, a lot more complex information that they have to deal with, more complex decision-making. So it makes sense that if you've worked your way up the management levels and you are a senior manager, that you've really had to develop your learning agility to respond to the demands in your environment. High potentials are actually benchmarked even higher than senior managers, and these are high potentials at any level of the organization. And I find this quite interesting because what it means is you don't actually have to be a leader to be high on learning agility, and anyone at any level can actually be a naturally agile person. And understanding that about your employees or understanding that about yourself is a very good starting point in terms of recognizing and developing your potential. And then lastly, change agents. This is a group that is extremely high on learning agility. And these are people who are just naturally wanting to experiment. They're naturally energized by change and new experiences. And we find that they are typically very high performers and also add a lot of value in team settings, whether it's in an organization or in an academic setting, to really help inspire and lead others as well towards change. All right, so let's look at a meta-analysis that was done quite recently as well. So this is some additional research information which you may find interesting. In this meta-analysis, they looked at 20 different studies that compared learning agility to workplace performance. And what they also did is they compared learning agility to other sources of information that we typically use in the field to try and predict performance, right? Because that's ultimately what it's about. Why are we doing these assessments? What are we trying to get at when we develop these areas? Well, it's really about improving performance at the end of the day, or optimizing performance, should I say. So if we look at job experience, right, as an area that predicts performance, keeping in mind that this is something that people typically look at on CVs and things like that, it actually has quite a low relationship with job performance. If we look at emotional intelligence, what we've called EQ, that has a moderate relationship in line with other research of about 0.2 to 0.3. Cognitive ability, 0.6. Right, so that's getting quite high. Cognitive ability, there's a lot of research to show that it's quite important when we consider job performance. But learning agility in this meta-analysis had an extremely high relationship with job performance of 0.74. And, that's a very valuable thing to consider because I think a lot of the time people have been very focused on things like EQ and cognitive ability, but really learning agility is that secret puzzle piece, that area that we may not have been considering previously, that can actually play a large role in the puzzle of performance, whether it's your own performance or within an organizational setting. So, this is the reason why it has become so popular and why we would also really promote it as something to consider for yourself especially if in the future organizations are going to start looking for this more and more, it makes sense to start developing it as early as possible. Thanks, Jay.
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin. And I think if we can give you a very real practical example, if you think about when countries went into lockdown with the COVID-19 pandemic, people were then required to work virtually instead of going to the office. And who were the people that could actually cope with making that transition from going to office every day to actually just working from home? It was the people with the higher learning agility. Similarly, with students that could no longer attend classes in person, but then had to attend class online, were the ones that were able to cope better. It was the ones with learning agility. So we saw a number of clients scrambling to try and get learning agility profiles so that they could understand how to support individuals and also make decisions about who can continue working virtually, for example. So how do we actually get a sense of your learning agility? We utilize both the personality and the motivations assessment that we just spoke about, the same set of results. And the personality, once again, is utilized to give a sense of what is your potential for those 5 different learning agility dimensions and then overall learning agility. And the motivations assessment is used to give an indication of how driven are you to be agile. Okay, so you might have the potential, but you might not be that motivated to act on it. So both of these aspects are very important. So we utilize both of those measures to give you an indication of your overall learning agility. Now, what is being made available to you is an instrument that's actually designed to develop one's learning agility. There are other instruments that are used for decision-making purposes and comparison to role requirements and so on, but the ones that we're making available to you is actually designed to facilitate your learning agility development. So in this case, the product is not actually a report, even though you can download a PDF from the online system, but it's actually an interactive online module that is utilized to develop learning agility. When you finish the personality and motivations assessments, your learning agility goal, that's what it's called, is available immediately. Now, the learning agility goal will explain to you what is learning agility, how do we measure it, and then go on to talking about your results. When you look at your results, it's given to you in this dashboard fashion. So instead of a score, you see this orange arch. Now, the orange area is your current level of the particular agility we're talking about, in this case, change agility. Okay, and the paragraph to the left here is a description of this level of change agility. The light blue, that is your potential to stretch your change agility even further, or put in another way, your potential to develop even further. And that's the maximum that you can likely expect given your levels of potential and motivations. Okay. You are then given 3 tips that will help you to actually make the most out of your potential and motivations. And depending on which tip you select, you can expect different levels of change. That is what the darker blue is saying. So this person in this example selected tip 3. Here you can see the example of tip 3. If the person successfully implements tip 3, that is how much change they can expect in their change agility. Okay. Once you've selected a tip, you then need to do a little bit of work. You also need to tell us what you're actually going to do. Okay, so there is an element of you actually also acting upon your results. Okay, once you've selected your tips from the 5 different areas, there's a summary of how much change you can expect in your learning agility. Here you'll see a little bit of a darker blue. So that's the original learning agility level, but this is how much change or improvement the person can expect if they successfully implement all of the tips that they have selected. Okay. Here's an example of where the person needs to provide some input about how they're going to implement that particular tip. On the left-hand side, you see the 5 tips that the person selected, and the star rating is saying to the person what's the best tip for him or her. Okay, the higher the star rating, the more suitable and the better development they're going to get. Okay, so that's a learning agility goal, available immediately you finish the personality and motivations assessment. Critical, not just to harness your learning agility right now in the academic environment and ensure that you are coping and excelling in the academic environment, but also getting you ready for the world of work as well. So this is very often used by graduate programs for our clients here in South Africa and also internationally. So one of the graduate programs in Stockholm, for example, uses this because they acknowledge that to excel in a leadership type of position, you need to have higher than average learning agility. And it is something you can develop. Okay. I see that we're not doing too well in terms of time. So with your indulgence, I'm quickly going to talk about the last type of assessment that we can do. So the fourth measurement that we can take is of your interests. And interests here basically is talking about what do you enjoy and get satisfaction from actually doing. Okay. Now, enjoy doing, and that's your interests. Okay. We measure your interests using the shortest questionnaire so far, and it is based on Holland's theory or model. So Holland's model is quite a well-known model. Holland identified 6 different work environments that individuals could find enjoyable, and those 6 work environments are listed at the bottom of the slide. So once you've completed the questionnaire, we can actually rank these 6 work environments in priority order for you. And we can then tell you which are your top 2 areas of interest. Okay. And once we have all of that information, we can then make a broad recommendation about what broad work field to consider. In this example, we've recommended that the person consider writing or entertainment. Now you'll see that the person's interests, motivations, and competencies are reflected on a 10-point scale. And it's given in this manner only to enable you to be able to compare your level of interest across the 3 different work fields that we are recommending for you, and so on with your motivations and competencies. Okay. So in this example, we can see that the individual is really going to enjoy the entertainment industry. I see a score of 10 for that. That's something that they will get a lot of satisfaction and pleasure from. However, professions in the entertainment industry are not going to give the person what they want from the work environment. So remember those 20 motivators that we spoke about, things like status, responsibility, independence, and so on. So this person's particular motivational profile is not a good fit for those types of professions. However, they can actually do those types of roles. As you can see, quite a high competency potential fit. So for this individual, writing is looking like a better choice because there's a high level of interest. There's also quite a high level of motivations, definitely higher than what you find in entertainment. And the person also has the innate potential for those types of roles. And so once you complete the 3 different assessments, we can generate the Future Me report for you. The Future Me report is quite comprehensive. It's going to give you recommendations for 3 broad work fields. And within each of those work fields, it also gives specific roles that you can consider. And it tells you what that is based on. So it's based on your top 2 areas of interest, in this example, artistic and social. It's also going to tell you your top 4 motivations. And here you can see the top 4 for this person. The screenshot has cut off the rest of the page, but it also tells you what your top 4 top 4 competencies are. So remember, once you take the personality, we have all of the data for all 44 competencies. So this report ranks those 44 competencies and tells you what your top competency potential areas are. So even if you're not interested in any sort of career counseling, this report is the most comprehensive in that it gives you your top motivators, your top 10 competencies actually. So even though in the front page, it lists the top 4, in the detail part of the report, it actually gives you your top 10 competency potential areas, which I think you will find very valuable not just in terms of career counseling and deciding what roles to accept, but also in terms of your own insight and self-awareness. Okay, so that was the future me very quickly. And as Caitlin indicated, you can find detailed information about all of the reports that we spoke about in the flipbook that was compiled by the Golden Key team. And Marika has shared the URL for you in the chat, so you can access that. It will also tell you about the actual assessments that are required and also the cost of each of those different reports. Now, speaking about the cost, Golden Key has negotiated so that all of these reports are available to you at a hugely discounted rate. So you definitely are not going to be paying what any one of our corporate clients are going to be paying. So I would recommend that you do try and take advantage of this opportunity that has been made available to you. Okay, so we've gone over time a little bit. Thank you for your indulgence, but we still are going to remain available if anybody still has any questions and if there's anything you'd like to discuss with us. Caitlin, do we have any questions coming forward?
Yes, thank you, Jantran. I see one of the questions from Helga was, can you develop learning agility?
Absolutely, Helga. So, you know, you have some room to actually stretch your learning agility in terms of your potential, but more especially in terms of your motivations. And the first step to actually developing your learning agility is getting insight into what your current profile looks like. And it could be a case that maybe you've never thought about it in this way before. Maybe you never thought that, you know, not being open to new hardware, for example, is impacting on your change agility. But just getting this insight is actually going to contribute towards developing your learning agility. And once you understand where your potential lies and what you're driven by, that's also going to help you improve your learning agility.
Yeah. And just to add to that, self-awareness is a very big part of learning agility. So I would also do some research on learning agility and self-awareness, and things like attending this webinar, doing these assessments. These are all exercises which show that, you know, you are focused on your own growth and your self-awareness, which is once again a very big part of learning agility. All right, and then one more question, Jantran from Unako. I hope I'm saying it correctly. Can an industrial psychologist conduct career counseling?
Absolutely. I think an industrial psychologist is probably the best placed person to conduct career counseling, along with what do we call them, counseling psychologists, as well as psychologists working in a more academic environment. But yes, short answer, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then Scott, I just wanted to say thank you for your comments throughout and for being so engaged. We appreciate your attendance. And then Rachel asks, as an organizational psychologist, does your role ever consider the workplace culture and improving the workplace culture?
Nice question, Rachel. So the scope of industrial psychology or organizational psychology is about the wellness of the entire organization. So typically we deal with the organization as a so-called client. And this is one of the things that the client might present us with, either wanting to diagnose the workplace culture or to shift the workplace culture a little bit. So this is absolutely an area that an organizational psychologist would actually practice in. Unfortunately, Rachel, we don't get asked those questions often enough because they are the more interesting questions, but they're also the more challenging questions. And it takes a really mature organization to actually reflect in that way and be open and brave enough to be asking questions about their culture.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Caitlin and Jantran. I think this was a very productive and fruitful webinar. People were interactive, and I see that they really enjoyed it. So with that, and without any other questions, I am then going to close this webinar. The link to this webinar will also be available on the YouTube. And I can ask my team, for everyone that participated, to also please send them a mail with a link to the uploaded webinar as well as a link to the ebook, although it is available on the Golden Key Academy. So maybe we could just show people where it is. I had it open and I miraculously closed it again. One of my team members may be more agile with that. Oh no, there it is. I thought I've opened it.
Yes, we can see your screen.
You can see my screen. So there you are. I'm logged in as myself on the Golden Key Academy, and there, discover your talents, take a skills assessment, choose a talent index. So it's very easy to find, and when you click on that, it will open the ebook with all the information on it. There you can see it, and you can select one of those. Okay, so it's possible. Go and do that. Opportunities only come by once. Don't let this one slip past, and then tomorrow when we don't have the relationship anymore for whatever reason, the opportunity is gone. I really hope to see that you all at least do Talent Go. Have a good day, and thank you for joining us on this webinar, and enjoy your evening. Have a safe evening or your day. Keep well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
You can leave by clicking on the red leave button on the top of the bottom of the screen. Thank you.